This video is yet another really exciting one, because now we're gonna create our very first real web server capable of accepting requests and sending back responses. And the first step is to include yet another package or another module, okay? And this one is called HTTP. So we're using the require function again, and then requiring the built-in HTTP module. And that's the one that gives us networking capabilities, such as building an HTTP server. Okay? Now let's actually comment out this code here so that it doesn't get in our way. Okay? So let's actually create kind of a divider here. So this one is for files, and this one is for server. And now, in order to build our server, we have to do two things. First, we create the server, and then second, we start the server so that we can actually listen to incoming requests. Okay, so we use our HTTP module, and just like before, we used a method that is on that object. So just like we did with the fs module, right? So http dot create server. And create server will accept a callback function, which will be fired off each time a new request hits our server. And this callback function gets access to two very important and fundamental variables. It is the request variable and the response variable. And a little bit more about them in a second. So request and response. And so all we want to do now is to actually send back a response to the client. And we do that with res, which is this object here, this response object, dot end, and then hello from the server. So that is the response that we're going to send back. So again, each time that a new request hits our server, this callback function here will get called. And the callback function will have access to the request object, which holds all kinds of stuff like the request URL and a bunch of other stuff. On the other hand, this response object here gives us a lot of tools basically for dealing with the response, so for sending out the response. And the simplest one is .end. And this .end here, the naming of this method, will make a bit more sense a bit later. For now, just note that this is the simplest way of sending back a very, very simple response in this case. Okay, so that's really all we have to do to send back a plain text response when a certain request comes in. Now, if you're a bit confused about all these terms, like incoming request or sending responses, or even about why we do actually have requests and responses here on our server, then don't worry, because we have a whole lecture coming up about how the web works, where we're going to talk all about the client-server model and really how network applications work in general. Again, in this section, my main focus is on actually showing you all the stuff and really making it work, and then the theory will follow a bit later. Okay, so that's the philosophy I've used in all my other courses, and it's been working really well, and so I believe it's a good thing to do it here as well. Anyway, creating the server was the first part, and now the second part is to actually listen to incoming requests from the client. Okay, now in order to do that, we actually need to save the result of this create server here to a new variable. So we call it usually server. So server is the result of this create server method here. Okay, so it will create a server, and now we use that server And on that, we can call listen. And listen accepts a couple of parameters. The first one is the port. And usually the port that we use in Node is, for example, 8000. But you will see other numbers like 3000 or 80 or something like that. And in case you're wondering what a port actually is, well, it doesn't really matter, but all you need to know is that it's basically a sub-address on a certain host. And the host is what we specify next. Okay, we actually don't need to specify it, and then we'll default to localhost, but we can actually specify it also to localhost explicitly. So localhost usually has this address as a default, and localhost simply means the current computer, so the computer that the program is currently running in. And again, this is the standard IP address for that localhost. Okay, so this one here will start listening for incoming requests. So basically starting up the server. Then as an optional argument, we can also pass in a callback function, which will be run as soon as the server actually starts listening. And so here, it's quite usual to simply display a message that the server has been started. So let's say listening to requests on port 8000. And so now all we have to do is to actually go to this URL on our computer on port 8000. Now, before we can do that, of course, we have to run the Node application. So node index.js, and here we have our log. So listening to requests on port 8000. And you see that the app keeps running. So before, it was always stopping right away. So it did its work, and then it exited the application. Right now, it doesn't do that. And that's because of something called the event loop that we're going to talk about a bit later in another section of this course. But no matter what the technical reasons are for this, it is obvious that the app cannot really exit right away, because then we could not receive any new requests, right? And so when we start a server, Node cannot simply exit the process, so exit the program, because the whole goal is to wait for requests to come in, right? So this is what I'm going to show you next. For now, let's just open up the IP address on port 8000. And for that, we use the colon and then the port number. So this is the host, which is localhost, colon, and then the port number. Hit enter, and here we go. So hello from the server. And so yeah, it really works. You have a real web server now running on your computer using Node.js. Congratulations. So let's go back here and again analyze what happened here. So we created our server using createServer and passed in a callback function that is executed each time that a new request hits the server. And then we started listening for incoming requests on the localhost IP and then on port 8000. And so once we had all this running, we actually did the request by hitting that URL. So basically by hitting localhost on port 8000. And so then under the hood of Node.js, an event was fired, which is something that, again, we're going to talk about a bit later. But what matters here is that this event then made it so that this callback function was called. Okay? And finally, as a result of that, we then got back this string. So now just for the sake of curiosity, let's actually take a look at the request object. Okay? So we need to close the server and start it again because we did some changes to the code. And notice how this time I actually used Control-C in order to exit the application. So remember that in the beginning, when we used the REPL, I used Control-D in order to exit it, right? But now, when we have a Node program running like this, we need to use Control-C to basically break from that program. Okay, and so again, that's why here I used Control C, and throughout the rest of the course, when I want to finish a program, I will always be using Control C. So that's Control and not Command C again. So even on a Mac, you need to use Control C. Let's now do this again. We get the same response, but now we should have something in the console. And so this here is the request object. And as I mentioned, there is a ton of stuff in here. You see? So all of this, it doesn't even fit actually in the console. Okay, so I think I cannot even show you like all the cool data that is in there. Or actually here we have some headers. So we have the host, and here we have some, so we have some HTTP headers, which is something that we're going to talk about, I think, in the next video. Okay, but anyway, what matters here is that we really get access to all kinds of stuff when we handle the request and send out the response. Okay, so it doesn't matter here. Let's actually get rid of this, give it a save, quit this, and start it again. And now, just to finish this video, I want to show you what we're actually going to build in the next couple of lectures, so until the end of this section. So it's this small fun app called the Node Farm. Okay, so we have a couple of products here, and we built all of this here using a very simple HTML template. And you can then click on the link, and it will basically take you to the detail page for this product. So in this case, the avocados. It then has a bunch of data here, a button, which doesn't do anything, and then we can go back to the page. So avocados, then we have the cheese, for example, and it has then, of course, different data for each of these products. So it has this nice, fresh, kind of crazy design to it to make it pop a little bit. And yeah, I think this is a fun little project, and we're going to start building it actually right in the next video.